I'm going to talk to you today about clinical trials. And we had a nice introduction to some of the terminology with Dr. Sharpman's talk. There's many types of clinical trials, or studies as they're called. There are drug studies, device studies, procedure studies, and so on. For our purposes today, we are going to discuss drug studies. Okay, so what is a clinical trial? Well, it's any investigation in human subjects intended to determine the clinical, pharmacological, pharmacokinetic, and/or other pharmacodynamic effects of an investigational agent, and/or to identify any adverse reactions to an investigational agent to assess the agent's safety and efficacy. Simply put, any investigation in humans to test a new drug or treatment for safety and efficacy, or to see if it's safe and effective. I don't want to be a guinea pig. This is something we hear quite often in our office when we approach patients to participate in a clinical trial. What patients don't understand is that clinical trials are governed by regulations and guidelines. These are both federal regulations known as the Code of Federal Regulations and international guidelines known as Good Clinical Practices. The purpose of these regulations and guidelines is to ensure the rights, safety, and well-being of study participants. So how does a drug make it to clinical trial? Well, someone somewhere discovers a compound that they think may have some scientific benefit. Before it can be tested in humans, they need to conduct preclinical testing. Preclinical studies must be conducted either in vitro, which is in a test tube, but usually in vivo, which is on animals, to determine if the drug is safe. Once the preclinical testing is done, an investigational new drug application must be filed with the FDA. This must be completed and a number received before the testing is allowed to go on in humans. So we have our IND number. What next? Well, a protocol must be designed. A protocol is the plan of the study. It is the guide that all of the participating researchers will follow. It explains the rationale, the objectives, and how and when the procedures will be done. All protocols in the US, Japan, and European Union have been standardized to follow the GCP guidelines by the International Conference on Harmonization. This is to help reduce redundant research in all of the countries. So a study that's done in Japan, we can use those results to get a drug approved in the United States. A protocol needs to be submitted to the IRB for approval, or Institutional Review Board. So what's an Institutional Review Board? An Institutional Review Board is a diverse group of individuals who review a protocol to ensure that the protocol is ethical and that there's scientific validity, as well as a favorable risk-to-benefit ratio. The Code of Federal Regulations states that an IRB must have at least 5 members. 1 must be from the community, 1 must have a scientific background. One person who would not be permitted to participate in a protocol review would be someone who is trying to get his protocol approved. The IRB approves both the protocol and the consent form the patient will sign. A study may not begin without IRB approval. The IRB can request that changes be made to either the protocol or the consent form in order to assure patient safety and understanding of the study. The consent form will list all of this information and more. It'll list the sponsor of the study, the phase of a study, the rationale for the study, the length of the study, the procedures to be performed, the risks and benefits, cost to the patient, payment to the patient, and contact information. You may hear the term informed consent in your doctor's office. The informed consent is not just the paper form the patient signs, but it includes the discussion that goes on between the doctor, the patient's family, the study coordinator, to ensure that the patient understands the study. So before a patient can participate in a study, they must sign a consent form. This is the paper consent form. The consent form is not a contract. Participation is voluntary, and a patient may withdraw consent at any time. You know, while we hope that somebody decides to participate in a clinical trial and that they stay till the end, you know, we certainly understand that situations change during the course of a study and somebody may need to drop out of the study. A patient can do that at any time. If you do decide to exit a study early, you'll probably be asked to return to your doctor's office for an exit visit, and this is just to ensure the patient's safety. So now we're going to talk about some study terminology. I know Dr. Shartman mentioned phases of studies and things like that, so we're going to talk to some terminology you would find in a consent form. And some other things your doctor might mention to you. One of the things, well, let's start with this. There's 4 phases of a clinical trial. And I think one of the studies Dr. Shartman mentioned, he said it was a phase 1 study. A phase 1 study is the first testing in humans. Phase 1 studies are designed to establish the effects of a new drug. In some studies, they're done on patients with the disease, but a lot of times these phase 1 studies are conducted on healthy people. And this is to determine the drug's toxicity, absorption, distribution, and metabolism. A phase 1 study generally has 20 to 30 participants, and often these patients are paid for their participation because of the time and the risk involved. So after a successful completion of a phase 1 study, we then go to a phase 2 study. This is to test the safety and efficacy of the drug on individuals with the disease the drug has been developed for. Phase 2 studies may have 100 patients or participants or more. The third and last pre-approval round of testing is a phase 3 study. These are generally done on large numbers of patients, and it's usually test the new drug against the standard of care. The results of these trials are usually the information that you see in the package insert when you get drugs that have been approved. A phase 3 trial can have hundreds to several thousand patients. A pivotal study is usually a phase 3 study. This is the data that the FDA reviews to decide whether or not to approve a drug. A pivotal study is generally well-controlled, randomized, of adequate size, and whenever possible, double-blind. We're going to discuss this terminology in a few more slides. A phase 4 study is after the drug has been approved by the FDA, and this is just to compare the newly approved drug with its competitors, explore additional patient populations, and to study any new adverse events. So let's talk about some study terminology. The sponsor. The sponsor of the study is usually the company that's paying to put the study on. In a drug study, it can be the pharmaceutical company. The investigator is the doctor in your clinic's office that's participating in the study. There's a principal investigator, and he oversees the conduct of the entire study in the office, and then there are sub-investigators that are also participating. The study coordinator, and that's what I do, is the person you're going to spend a lot of time with. He or she is going to schedule your appointments, make sure you get to the clinic on time, make sure everything goes smoothly, and make sure all the data that's collected gets entered into the system. Multi-center means it's done at more than one center. So if it's a multi-center study, it's not just being done at your doctor's office. And site or sites is the clinic or clinics where the study is conducted. So let's talk about some more terminology. A few slides back, I mentioned that a pivotal study would be generally well-controlled. Well-controlled means that we compare the new treatment with the standard treatment or placebo. Patients are randomly assigned. Random means it's like flipping a coin. Although we don't flip a coin now, we usually call into a computer system that randomly assigns the patient. Patients who receive treatment are in the treatment group, and patients who receive standard care or no treatment are in the control group. Masked or blinded. They mean the same thing. In ophthalmology, we like to use the term masked instead of blinded, but they mean the same thing. A patient will be masked as to which group they're in, so the patient wouldn't know if they were receiving the drug, the standard treatment, or a placebo. Every patient, no matter what their treatment assignment is treated the exact same way. So double masked or blinded means that neither the researcher or the patient will know what their assignment is. And this is to prevent bias and to ensure that the investigator treats every patient the same way. Now, this is just the front page of a consent form. And I know it's hard to see, so I'm going to put the header up. And let's see, now that we talked about some terminology, if we can figure out what this study is. So it says this study is a randomized, double-masked, multi-center phase 2 study comparing the safety and efficacy of ABC XYZ with placebo when used in conjunction with ranibizumab to treat neovascular age-related macular degeneration. So what we know is it's randomized. Patient's going to be randomly assigned. Double masked. The doctor's not going to know what the patient gets. The patient's not going to know. Multi-center. It's done at more than one clinic. Phase 2. So there'll be 100 or so patients in this study. And we're comparing the safety and efficacy of the drug with a placebo. But then it goes on to say that in conjunction with ranibizumab, which is Lucentis, so that's a standard treatment. So this study, basically, all patients will be getting the standard of care, which is the ranibizumab, but some of the patients may get an additional treatment with the drug. This is the rest of the protocol, and you can see it has the protocol number, the IRB protocol number, it lists the sponsor, the investigator, the site that it's done, and contact phone numbers. So during Dr. Sharpman's talk, somebody said, well, what's a benefit to participating in a clinical trial? Well, some of the benefits are you gain access to new treatments, and these treatments may help to improve or control your condition. You'll get the highest quality medical care. And one thing I hear from patients who participate in the study, they like that they know who they can contact if they have a problem. You work very closely with the study coordinator, so if you have any concerns, they know they can call the office and have their concerns addressed immediately. You might help family members and society by contributing to medical research. And many clinical trials involve no cost to the patient. Some trials offer a stipend, and I think Dr. Sharpman had mentioned that. That's to help pay for if it's a long day at the clinic, your lunch, your gas, whatever. Some studies, particularly ophthalmology studies, tend to offer transportation because they realize we're treating patients with vision problems, so driving to and from the clinic is a huge problem. What are some risks of clinical trials? Well, you may be required to make more visits to the clinic than usual. There may be some previously unknown side effects. and the new treatment may turn out not to be any better than the standard care. Well, thank you, and I hope I helped explain some of the terminology, and if you're ever asked to participate in a study, you'll feel confident that you understand what the study is, and you'll be able to make an educated decision.